The gun control debate has become so commonplace and central to American culture in recent years that at this point it's about as American as apple pie. Except apple pie is tasty and delicious, and the gun control debate is, unfortunately, filled with a lot of myths, misinformation, and sometimes flat-out manipulation. In this video, I'll be debunking some of the most common gun control myths and explaining exactly why they're wrong. First up, the most common among all gun control arguments is the need for universal background checks. This ends up being a big focus of most politicians looking to do something about violent crime, in exchange for looking proactive enough to get some more votes. This one isn't so much a myth in terms of being a made-up statistic, as it is a myth because it basically already exists. Background checks at point of sale have been federal law in the United States since 1993. The Brady Law specifically requires every firearm sale or transfer that occurs through a federally licensed firearms dealer, or FFL, first be subject to a background check in the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, or NICS. So when someone wants to buy a gun, they go to a federal dealer, fill out an ATF form, and then the FFL contacts NICS via phone or website. In most states, the FFLs contact NICS directly, though in a few states, the FFL contacts the state, who then goes through NICS. Which means that any politician calling for background checks is virtue signaling with a new law that would be redundant, and is hoping that you don't know that.
Do you have any idea how many votes that'll buy me?
Before we get into the other four myths, I'd like to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura. Take a minute and think about how many online accounts you have, whether it's for streaming, shopping, gaming, or even online bill pay.
Too many!
The average American has over 100 accounts, but not 100 passwords, which leaves the door wide open for identity theft. And identity theft can ruin your life and your bank account. That's why I'm excited that Aura is sponsoring this video, and I am especially grateful because within minutes of signing up, I learned that I am one of the unlucky folks with their passwords and social security number floating around the internet. And that is mildly terrifying. Aura is identity theft protection, fraud monitoring, a VPN, password management, and antivirus software, all combined into one easy-to-use app. Aura monitors the dark web for your emails, passwords, and social security numbers, and sends alerts fast, right to your phone and email. Connect your credit and bank accounts and get notified of any changes up to 4 times faster than Aura's competitors. Their VPN allows you to stay anonymous online by keeping your browsing history and personal information safe and encrypted, and their antivirus software will block malware and viruses before they infect your devices. If you use my link on screen, aura.com/libertydoll, or down in the description, you get to try it for 2 weeks absolutely free. Again, that link is aura.com/libertydoll. And now, back to the show. Another popular myth that we see piggybacking on that one is the myth of the gun show loophole. This one is just flat out not true. There is nothing written into law that excludes gun shows from the Brady Law.
It's called constructing a narrative, JJ.
Most of the folks at gun shows are, in fact, federally licensed dealers and thus legally have to conduct a background check at point of sale. The one exception to this is private sales. That's something that is regulated under state law and often still requires a background check or some other confirmation that the buyer isn't a prohibited person. A lot of times, even if there isn't a law requiring a background check on private sales, the seller will opt to do the transfer through an FFL, check the buyer's gun license, or do some other form of due diligence.
Because that's the right thing to do.
Since the internet has become more and more prevalent in people's lives, internet gun sales has also become a popular topic with politicians and organizations pushing for gun control, which brings us to our myth number 3. Online gun sales are no different than those at gun shows. You can order a gun online in some states, but you still need to go to a licensed dealer to complete the purchase and do a background check. Many popular websites for classifieds also require paid memberships, and these websites don't actually conduct the transactions. Instead, they default back to the individual parties involved and the laws around all other gun sales. So there's no internet loophole either, at least if you're acting legally. If you're not acting legally, well, then you clearly don't care about the law anyways, do you?
No, I don't.
For myth number 4, we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction and look at previous policies put in place. The biggest and most famous policy that even the least versed person knows about is the federal assault weapons ban that was in place from 1994 to 2004. The big argument in favor of this past ban, and passing it again, is that banning certain rifles or certain cosmetic features from being included on rifles would stop homicide.
Boy, do I have a surprise for you.
I've covered this pretty in-depth on my channel before, but the short version is this. The assault weapons ban defined certain common use rifles as assault rifles based on certain cosmetic features such as a telescoping stock, which really just meant that the stock of the rifle could be adjusted for the arm length of whoever was shooting it. The banned features really didn't affect anything about the actual functioning of the rifle. In fact, the banned features couldn't even be defined or actually even pointed out by many of the politicians that supported this law, but that's neither here nor there.
I read the legislation and it said that it would regulate barrel shrouds. What's a barrel shroud and why should we regulate that?
I'm not saying it was the best bill, but that was the best bill
Do you
they
know
could
what a
get
barrel
out at that
shroud
particular
is?
time. I actually don't know what a barrel
Oh,
shroud
okay,
is.
'cause
I
it's in
believe
your
it's a shoulder thing
legislation.
that goes up.
As to whether or not this law reduced violent crime in general, both private research and research conducted by the CDC either found no effect at all or ruled the research inconclusive. The bill was introduced as a response to several high-profile incidents in the 1980s and early 90s. Interestingly enough, several of these incidents also involved handguns and shotguns, but rifles became and continue to be the focus of gun bans. In reality, so-called assault weapons and their high-capacity magazines, which are actually standard in most cases, were used and continue to be used in a very low percentage of violent crimes. Depending on the definition of assault weapon used, these rifles and their magazines were used in only 1 to 6% of violent crimes prior to the ban, for an average of 2% of all crime guns. Rifles account for about 200 to 300 of the roughly 10,000 homicides involving guns each year. By comparison, knives, blunt objects, hands, feet, fists, and even pushing people are all used more often than rifles. So if you're going to be murdered, you are literally more likely to be pushed to your death than you are to be killed by someone with a rifle.
Numbers don't lie.
The FBI statistics don't differentiate between an assault rifle and a run-of-the-mill hunting rifle, so the number of assault rifles used in homicides is probably even less. And finally, our last gun control myth for this video, that gun bans have stopped crime in other countries and thus would have the same effect here. There are a few things wrong with these comparisons, and oftentimes the arguments given by gun control supporters aren't even accurate. For example, folks in favor of strict or total gun bans often point to the rate of mass shootings, claiming that they don't happen in other countries.
Oh, well, that's not true.
A study conducted by the Crime Prevention Research Center looked at mass shooting incidents that occurred from January 2009 until the end of December 2015. In this analysis, they learned that the U.S. was not at the top of the list. In fact, the U.S. wasn't even in the top 10 in terms of death rate from or frequency of mass shootings. More recent research, updated in 2020, found similar results. It's a very different narrative than what we're getting from ABC and NBC and CNN. So then maybe the solution to this myth and making it stick is to look at crime in general in places like, say, Australia. Australia enacted federal gun bans across all territories in 1996. And on the surface, the ban worked to curb homicide, at least initially. But the crime rates in Australia were already declining prior to the ban, and so were the rates of firearm-related homicides. Australia is the only country to have banned guns and seen a lower murder rate, but the rate at which it declined is the exact same rate that it was already declining on a year-to-year basis before the ban. Even Time magazine in 2008 concluded that new research proved that the Australian ban had been not only a waste of public money, but had had no real effect on crime rates. Instead, knives have become the most common murder weapon in Australia, followed by hands, feet, and fists.
That sounds familiar.
Similar trends of little to no effect on violent crime, as well as knives and fists becoming more popular murder weapons, can be seen in other countries with sweeping gun legislation, such as the UK. Further, homicide and crime rates in general have been going up in the UK rather than down. So much so that now there are kitchen knife buyback programs. Seriously.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
But even outside of that, comparing the US to a country like, say, Australia or England ignores some pretty big legal and population differences. The populations of Australia and the UK are about 26 million and 67 million respectively. Compare that to about 331 million in the US. It's like comparing New York City with some place like Pickens, South Carolina. Not only that, but most of the gun laws in question in places like Australia are on the federal level, while in the US, guns are largely regulated at the state level, with a few exceptions, which is exactly why you can't directly compare Australia to the US as a whole in any meaningful way, any more than you can compare Massachusetts or New York to South Carolina. After the ban, Australia boasted a homicide rate of about 1 per 100,000. If we were to take some of the states with the strictest gun laws up to a similar population mark, let's say Massachusetts and New York, we get a murder rate of approximately 3 per 100,000. Similarly, Illinois, which had a total gun ban until recent years, has 12.5 million people and a homicide rate of 8 per 100,000. Most of these were in Chicago alone, a city that is famous for both its strict gun laws and staggering homicide rate. Last year, that number hit nearly 800. California, another tough state for gun owners, has a homicide rate of 4.5 per 100,000 people. So clearly, it can't be gun laws alone that are the answer to this equation. Now here, some people might argue that it's because the states around these high gun control states have lax laws. But you can't really argue that in the cases of places like New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Maryland, and Connecticut because, well, they're all grouped together. Research shows that population density, Australia's is pretty low on average, by the way, is a better predictor. The most recent research on this found that 51% of US homicides occurred in only 2% of counties, and even within those counties, the homicides were strictly concentrated to areas like LA, Baltimore, Chicago, and New York City. And yet, according to Pew, gun ownership is leaps and bounds more popular in rural areas than urban areas. And rural areas are both the areas with the lowest homicide rates and the lowest population densities, which is at least a little closer to the picture in Australia and certainly something to consider. On the whole, violent crime has been decreasing in the United States, and yet gun ownership has been increasing. At the very least, we can agree that that trend alone is very different from the statistics in Australia and the UK. That is it for today's video and these 5 gun control myths. Stick around for future videos debunking other popular gun control myths, as well as all kinds of other fun and hopefully educational topics. If you liked this video, please like, share, and consider subscribing if you're new here. And if you'd like to help support my work in more direct ways, I have all kinds of options listed in the description, including Patreon, Subscribestar, and a handy-dandy tip jar. Until next time, thanks for tuning in, stay safe, and happy shooting.